At the beginning of our movie today, we get to know Driver, and we learn that he's been in prison for 10 years for a bank robbery. Throughout his time in jail, he was counting the days, waiting for the moment he would be released. Driver had a picture of himself and his brother hanging on the wall of his cell, and every day he would look at it, waiting for this day. Finally, the day he had been waiting for arrived. The guards approached the cell door, slightly nervous, and then took him to the prison warden. The warden advised him to turn over a new leaf in his life and stop causing trouble like he did while inside. He also gave him a card with contact numbers for professionals who help people dealing with psychological issues, in case he needed any support. But as soon as Driver stepped out of prison, he immediately tossed the card away and started running a long distance until he reached a junkyard full of cars. There, a particular car was waiting for him, and the keys were there as well. The person who left the car and keys was an old friend of Driver's named Roy. We learn that Roy also left information and pictures of the first person from the gang that killed Driver's brother 10 years ago, along with the location of this person. Driver knew that his real mission hadn't started yet, and that there were a lot of scores to settle. He had a gun with a few bullets, and he placed his brother's picture on the car's sun visor, just as it had been in front of him during his time in prison. We see Driver speeding down the road, his brother's picture in front of him, and finally, he arrived in the city. He crossed the street, barely noticing the cars that almost hit him. Afterward, he entered a company, looking at the employees until he stopped in front of the man in the picture. He pulled out his gun, shot him, and finished him off. Then, he noticed a camera in the room, staring at it defiantly, showing that he didn't care about anything. The employees were terrified of him, but he calmly walked away. The police and investigators arrived to look into what happened, and one of the officers was Detective Cop, who took on the case personally. We find out that Detective Cop only had a few weeks left before his retirement. Detective Cicero was also involved in the investigation. Meanwhile, Driver decided to go back to Roy and asked him for the rest of the gang's names that killed his brother. He also handed Roy the money they had agreed upon. At this point, Roy brought up the crime Driver committed, telling him he saw it on the news, and demanded more money to give him the rest of the names. But Driver refused to pay him anything more than what they had agreed on. Roy had brought a street fighter named Kenny with him to intimidate Driver. But when Kenny got close to Driver and saw the tattoo on his arm, he was terrified and ran away immediately. The tattoo was written in Latin, and it meant that Driver died and came back to life. In that moment, Roy got scared and gave Driver all the information about the gang members, refusing to even take the money. Driver took the information and left immediately. We learn that the next target is a man named Tyson, who had hidden a camera in his jacket and coldly recorded them killing Driver's brother. After that, we see Detective Cicero and Cop watching the footage, discovering that the victim stood up as soon as he saw the killer. Then, we meet another character named Claire, who is now a very wealthy man living in a big villa with his girlfriend, Lily. Claire has magazine covers with his picture hanging on his walls, each one showcasing a different achievement in his life. We also find out that when Claire was younger, he had a disability in his leg but overcame it, challenged his limitations, and now he's super focused on his health and works out seriously. Then Claire gets a call from a client, the leader of the gang that killed Driver's brother, whose identity remains unknown. The client orders Claire to take out Driver and sends him Driver's picture so he knows what he looks like. He also tells him that Driver's next target is Tyson, and gives Claire his photo and address so he can protect him. Claire gears up, grabs his weapons, and heads out to surveil Sam and complete his mission to kill Driver. Meanwhile, Detective Cicero finds out that Driver is the man they're looking for, and that 10 years ago, he and his brother robbed a bank and managed to escape from the police. However, another gang ambushed them, killed Driver's brother, stole the money, and shot Driver. He survived, though, and they implanted a metal plate in his head. Afterward, he was sentenced to 10 years in prison for the bank robbery, and now it seems he's seeking revenge against everyone involved in his brother's murder. At this point, we see Driver arriving at the hotel where Tyson is staying. Tyson is walking with a cane, leaning on a girl for support as they head up to his room. Claire is there too, watching them. Claire approaches the girl and offers her a drink, which she accepts. But the drink is spiked with a drug. Suddenly, Tyson pulls out a camera and starts filming her, but Driver barges into the room and takes Tyson out. Driver assures the girl that he won't hurt her and then walks out of the room. Just as Driver steps outside, he finds Claire waiting for him with a gun aimed at him. Claire is about to pull the trigger and fire, but a little girl suddenly appears between them, causing Claire to hesitate. He lowers his weapon, unwilling to shoot because of the child. Driver sees Claire, and even though he could kill him, he instead rushes toward him, firing rapidly, not to kill but to force Claire to take cover behind the wall. After the shooting stops, Claire emerges from behind the wall, looking around, but Driver is nowhere to be found. That's because Driver had quickly fled the scene, hopped in his car, and sped off. A little later, the police arrive at the hotel. Detective Cicero tells Cop that they found a bunch of videotapes showing Tyson filming unconscious women. She also mentions that they found evidence of a shootout in the hallway outside the room. That night, Claire is sitting with his fiancée, Lily, who knows everything about him, inside and out. After Claire tells her what happened, Lily assures him that she's confident he'll be able to take out Driver and succeed in his mission, just like he always does. Claire is obviously happy with her support and encouragement. Meanwhile, Driver arrives at the casino where Henderson is. He enters the casino and hands over his weapon at security, but he has no intention of letting things go smoothly. He decides to steal an ice pick to kill Henderson in the exact same way his brother was killed. Henderson is seen in the bathroom, looking into the mirror, when suddenly, he spots Driver behind him. At that moment, Driver locks the door, and Henderson pulls out the knife he used to kill Driver's brother, saying, "I've been waiting for you for a long time." They start fighting, but Driver is much stronger and faster, managing to overpower him. Before Henderson dies, he takes out his phone and asks Driver to call his son and tell him that he hopes he grows up to be a better man, and not to be angry with him. He also apologizes for killing his brother. Driver walks away while talking to Henderson's son, delivering his father's message. After that, he continues on his path. In the next scene, we see Claire looking at an old picture of himself as a child, remembering when he was paralyzed and unable to walk. His facial expression changes as he pulls out his weapons, preparing to finish off Driver. The next morning, Claire leaves his house, looking both confused and anxious. Detective Cicero calls Cop and tells him that the two people Driver killed were involved in his brother's murder, asking him to investigate. But Cop informs her that he's traveling to Nevada to investigate Henderson's death. At that moment, Driver hears in the news that Henderson is still alive and in the hospital, so he immediately heads there. When he arrives, he searches for Henderson until he sees him in the operating room with doctors surrounding him. He storms in and shoots him, killing him instantly. Meanwhile, Cop arrives at the hospital, hearing gunshots. He spots Driver and chases after him, firing his weapon. Driver shoots back, and Cop hides behind a wall. Suddenly, Cop finds Driver standing right in front of him with a gun. In fear, Cop throws his gun down, closes his eyes, and surrenders. But when he opens his eyes again, Driver is gone, having left the hospital. Driver then drives off down the road with Henderson's phone in his hand. At that moment, Henderson's son calls his father's phone. When Driver answers, the son vows revenge. Calmly, Driver replies, "Just make sure you can back up your words and handle what's coming." Claire shows up and begins chasing Driver. Driver is surprised when he sees Claire behind him, leading to a high-speed car chase. Being an expert driver, Driver speeds up, skillfully maneuvering around cars, and even going against traffic. He starts shooting at Claire's car, but he isn't aiming to kill. In return, Claire shoots Driver, hitting him in the neck, but luckily, the wound is superficial. Driver quickly drives to his parents' house. He enters, grabs a gun, and wakes his mother. When he asks her about his father, she tells him he passed away 4 years ago. She then tends to his wound, and he explains that he came to kill his father, believing his father had tipped off the police after refusing to join them in the bank robbery because he wanted a larger share of the money. His mother tells him that while his father was harsh, he would never harm his children. Convinced by her words, Driver explains that they had to rob the bank to pay off his brother's debts, and that he couldn't abandon his brother, so he had to join him in the heist. Driver stands in front of a picture of his brother with his friends. In the photo, his brother is standing next to Marina, the current wife of Detective Cop. At that moment, Driver starts to suspect that Marina may have set them up, working with the gang to kill them. After that, he takes the urn with his brother's ashes and sets off on his way to the final target on his list. While he's on his way, he hears the preacher on the radio, who turns out to be the same person Driver wants to kill. The preacher had become a religious leader and was giving a sermon about how revenge imprisons its seeker in a terrible mindset that ruins their life. However, the thought of revenge still dominates Driver, fueling him as he continues on his path toward his goal. At the police station, Cop tells Cicero about his encounter with Driver and how he miraculously survived. Cicero shows him the profiles of the criminals Driver killed, all of whom had heavy criminal records. She's convinced that an unknown person is pulling the strings, like a crime boss. Cop finds the file on the fourth person, who turns out to be the preacher, and decides to go to the place where the preacher holds his religious sessions. But Driver gets to the preacher before him, watching as the preacher gives a lesson on forgiveness and mercy. When the preacher spots Driver, he quickly wraps up his sermon and talks to him privately. The preacher sits with Driver and tells him he left the path of evil a long time ago and dedicated his life to leading others on the right path. He admits he was part of the gang that killed Driver's brother but insists he was the only one who opposed the murder. The money he took was spent on alcohol to forget what happened. He was imprisoned for a while, paid for his crimes, and during that time, he read religious books that changed his life. Now, he helps those in need. The preacher looks at Driver and says, "I forgive you for what you're going to do to me," and even prays for him. After hearing all of this, Driver feels conflicted, but he still makes the preacher kneel and points his gun at him, ready to pull the trigger. However, in the end, he changes his mind and spares the preacher's life, letting him live. All the while, Killer was watching them from a distance. Driver sits down, staring at a picture of his brother after avenging those who killed him. Then Killer approaches him with a gun and asks, "Why didn't you kill me?" Driver replies, "Because there's no reason to kill you." At that moment, Cop arrives at the scene and calls Cicero, telling her where he is. He also tells her that if anything happens to him, she should take care of his son. Cop enters the tent, points his gun at Killer, and orders him to drop his weapon. As soon as Killer lowers his weapon, Cop shoots Driver and kills him. We then learn that Detective Cop is the unknown figure who hired Killer to take out Driver. Not only that, but he's also the gang leader and the fifth person on Driver's list. He's the one who shot Driver in the back the first time. Killer tells him that his name wasn't on Driver's list and that he didn't know anything about him. Cop reveals that he's the one who shot Driver long ago and that his wife, Marina, was Driver's brother's fiancée. She was the one feeding him all the information about them. John is upset by what he hears and tells Cop to never contact him again before walking away. Cop was chasing after Driver to give him $1, the payment for the job, since Killer took on assassinations as a hobby and would do them for any price. But Driver refuses to take the dollar, as he wasn't the one who killed Driver. Then he walks away. Suddenly, Cop is shot in the head and falls to the ground. We see Driver standing over him, holding the metal plate that saved him from the bullet. Driver finishes Cop off and walks away. Cicero discovers that Cop was involved in the robbery that happened 10 years ago. When she arrives at the scene and sees Cop dead, she says he got what he deserved. She finally tears up the paper and keeps the secret to herself, as per Cop's wishes, so his son can be proud of him, just like he asked. In the end, Driver sits by the ocean at sunset, having successfully avenged his brother. And with that, our movie concludes for today. I hope you all enjoyed watching with me. Don't forget, if you liked the video, support us with a like and subscribe,